Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Can't believe it's both 2024 already.
I know. The calendar has flipped. It's hard to believe. And I feel like I say this every year, but it's, yep. Here we go again.
We're all getting younger.
Well, obviously.
I think my beard is getting whiter, unfortunately. I think the camera adds more whiteness to it. It used to be more red, but
no,
we'll see. But anyway, welcome back to Amplified Wealth. This is our third episode of According to Plan. So we're excited to kick off January in the spirit of this New Year's resolution type of a mindset, right? As we kind of kick off the new year, and we're happy to include our first guest on the episode.
We have a guest today, and I'm so excited to introduce my friend and longtime colleague, Monica Jalife. Monica has an incredible background, very impressive. She's now been with the firm for 22 years.
Yes.
I've been with the firm for 21. So we've been here for a long time together, which has been wonderful. Monica has her MBA from NYU. She has the CFA designation and she has the CFP designation. And, not only is an incredibly impressive individual, but a wonderful person. And we're just so excited that you're here joining us today, Monica. Thank you for taking the time.
And thanks for having me, guys.
You're so welcome.
It's not snowing. It's actually
It's not snowing
70.
in Florida, right?
I think we're going to get a cold front tomorrow, but that might be 40s or 30s, but not snow. No, thankfully.
Which is still cold for Florida. Everything's relative, right?
Correct.
I'm just surprised we're actually getting snow. It feels like it hasn't snowed here in the Northeast in about 3 years or so.
Well, we've been getting it. It's been making up for it lately, for sure. And I actually didn't know this, but snow absorbs sound. So, when you look outside and it feels peaceful, it's because it is. The snow actually helps to absorb sound. So I think,
maybe that'll help with our acoustics today too.
Maybe it will. We'll see.
While we're chatting.
I love it. Well, yeah, I guess, it's the new year. Super exciting. A lot of times we make resolutions. I feel like oftentimes they're more physical in nature, right? I want to be healthier. I want to eat better. I want to exercise more. I do that every year. That's usually my resolution. And that's great. Sometimes physical resolutions can lead to better, lower healthcare costs. So they are good resolutions to make for sure, but also focusing on the financial side, right? And how can we improve on the financial front? So we're so excited that Monica's here with us today. And she's prepared this financial wellness checklist, which I'm super excited about, because I think it's a great way for our listeners to just start thinking about, how to start this new year off right? And what are the things that we need to be focusing on, and what little tweaks we can make, and maybe best way to review some of our goals and our progress that we made in the last year. Right. And being That's positive right. and gentle on yourself sometimes too. Right.
Gyms are overflowing with people right now, right?
For like a month.
That'll soon peter out, right? As it always does. I think one of the things that we want to chat about today is, sustainability of these goals, right? It's we understand that it's hard to, achieve goals sometimes, right? It does take some persistence. But I think just based on the experience that the three of us have through the course of our career, some of those things we can talk about today. But yeah, let's kick it off with fresh start January, and I think that word goals is an important one, and it really can encompass a whole lot of different things. And of course, we want to chat about how to think about that to get the year started, right? So that we're not letting time pass us by, right, before it's too late. The sooner you get started, the easier it is to try to achieve some of your goals.
Yeah, and I think, like Kate said, like we always say, okay, what are our goals for the new year? And we have all those goals that Kate mentioned. But I think it's an easy way to say, just as you're thinking about, am I going to lose some weight, or am I going to exercise more, or am I going to change my diet? It's also good to make it a habit, right? To do this financial wellness check in the beginning of the year and also incorporate that. And we're not going to, go and make massive changes. I mean, maybe we will, but it's also good to think incrementally, right? What can I do step by step to continue improving my financial wellness? And part of it is really reviewing or reassessing where you are and where you need to go, or what steps you need to take.
That's a great point.
And little changes will feel less daunting. We're saying, I am going to X goal, right? So what I would say, as we incorporate this into call it our annual checkup, it's to review what your goals are. And the goals that you have, you can break them down. Again, it's not all, I'm going to retire in 25 years or 20 years. Is you can break those goals in short term, intermediate term, and long term. And then as you start to focus more on these things, it'll become a little bit easier, right? It's never going to be fully easy because, we're dealing with some long-term goals. We're dealing with money. We're dealing with a lot of things. We're dealing with planning, which is a fantastic tool and resources that we have. But, I think breaking it down by what do we need in less than a year, short-term goals, right? Some of those goals, I'll mention some, and guys, please jump in. This is your show. But I would say, what you have, do you have an emergency fund, right? I mean, if you have an emergency fund, that's great. There's different suggestions as to how many months you should keep of living expenses in an emergency fund. Some people say you could have, 3 months. Some people say 6 months. I think the number really will fall somewhere in there. But the important thing is you do need to have a part of your funds, or more of what you call your liquidity, in case there's any emergency. You have a certain time frame that can cover for your expenses. And fortunately,
isn't there like something crazy like 6 out of 10 employees wouldn't be able to cover something like a $500 expense? And I think that that's such a great point, Monica, because you don't want people dipping into long-term investments to meet those short-term needs, right? So really making sure that you have that buffer in place. So that's a great point.
And I'd say the good news is today, right? It's been so long since people actually earned some yield on some of this, emergency fund savings, because we're really talking about cash, right? We want our clients and our friends and colleagues to make sure that they have enough cushion in the bank, right? So it's readily accessible. And the good news is now, with interest rates being where they are, at least you're getting paid, more than where it's been for the last decade plus. So just from a building out this short term versus intermediate and long term, Monica, to your point, which I do think people do struggle with that balancing, right? How do I figure out ways to tackle my short term versus my long term goals, right? And I think a lot of times people think about that, and it starts to trip them up a little bit, right? So then they don't take action, right? And inertia sits in, and inertia is a very powerful force. But I think if you want to think about one positive effect of building out that emergency fund, is at least you're getting some good yield on that today.
Yeah,
I know.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, you can even have it in, you could be rolling treasuries. You could have it in a money, like you can have it in investments that are not going to take away your liquidity. But like Tom says, you're going to get paid more versus where we were over the past decade plus, right? But, on the flip side of that, with the higher interest rate environment that we are seeing now, there comes another point that I also wanted to mention, which is credit cards, right? And credit cards, they make money off that spread, right? So they charge us, they invest the money and they get the money and they charge us more for whatever money we have there. So it is also important in this environment, you're keeping your emergency, you're getting paid higher for it. But it is also very important to review your credit card, right? And your credit card balances. And it might not be possible to pay all your credit card debt right away. I mean, it would be fantastic, but sometimes we have to know that it's not possible. But it's good to review your credit cards. Where is the interest rate in your credit cards currently? And then come up with a plan, right? You can tackle the lowest balances first, or you can tackle the highest interest rates, because some of these cards now they're going crazy. Like they have interest rates that are like ridiculous. So it is also important to look at those things and say, okay, what can I do to start chipping away at those balances, right? When you get to a point where that you don't have a credit card balance, or you can just pay them in full, that's fantastic. But, it might take a couple baby steps, right?
Yeah. And just to give an example, right? Like, let's say you have a $10,000 balance, and you have a 20% interest rate, and you're paying just the minimum balance plus 1%, principal each month. That would actually take you 340 months to pay off, which is like a mortgage, and you'd pay $14,000 in interest over that period of time. So to your point, Monica, even though it might be, a smaller balance on a credit card, those interest penalty, those interest charges just can add up and can be very painful over time.
Which is interesting, Kate, because people are freaking out now about mortgage rates being 6-7%, right?
Sure.
Especially after how low they were, right? During the pandemic, people refinanced below 3% and things like that. I think there's a disconnect between that, how we think about the interest rate for credit cards, especially for folks that are not paying off those balances, right? So to your point, I think it becomes this hidden charge that somehow, some way, it's really not talked about a whole lot, but it's not unusual to see a credit card interest rate at 20% or more, right?
Sure. Right.
And we don't think about that in terms of, just the daily conversations about, finance and things like that. Although whenever you might talk to some of your friends or colleagues or so, and you talk about how happy you were that you were able to refinance or you bought a place when rates were at 3% or below, right? That's like a badge of honor. And people are saying, hey, I'm never going to move my house right now because I have such a great rate and stuff like that. But from a credit card standpoint, I think that's a great
expensive
great way
debt.
to think about it.
That's expensive debt for sure.
I worked with absolutely. One of my colleagues at a prior firm had a good way of putting it in terms of thinking about credit cards is I think there's been a shift in mentality where folks are thinking about credit cards as like a lending facility as opposed to a payment facility, right? They're really there to be a payment facility, right? Just a way for you to, charge whatever expense you have with the intention of paying that off when you get your bill on a monthly basis, right? But, certainly from a cash flow standpoint, they've become more of a lending type of facility. And that interest rate becomes this hidden piece that really drags on cash flow throughout the year.
Yeah.
So, And again, this is, wellness checkup. So it's
and
important.
By the way, I do have slides. Should we share?
Sure.
Should we share slides?
Absolutely.
You want me to pull them up here so at least we can have a visual for our people who are following us on YouTube?
And we have talked about, the emergency fund. We have talked about the different types of debt, right? Credit cards. We didn't talk about student loans, but, again, it would fall into review where are your interest costs on all your different types of debt and tackle the highest interest rate first, or wherever you get less of a benefit, like a credit card, and then keep moving across the spectrum. So we've touched on that, but I think a lot of us, we're different ages, we're in different stages of our lives, but it is very important. I mean, we are not in the era of pensions anymore, right? Where you would work for a long time in a company, and very few people have those. I mean, they still exist, but very few people have those. So it is very important, independently of what stage of our life we are, to think that at some point in time in the future, we probably won't want to work anymore, or we won't be able to, or whatever the reason is, we will need to have a source of income that is going to help us get through those years, right? And some people might be 20 years, some others might be 30, but we need to think about what do I want to do in retirement? How much do I need in today's dollars? And start to think about it and start to say, okay, am I saving enough? Am I realistic in my goals? What else can I do? So You're not going to solve for retirement in one day, or if you're starting to do this, but it's very advisable to start to think about what you want to do, right?
And the sooner you get started, the better, right? Einstein said, coined compounding interest, the eighth wonder of the world. And when you look at all those statistics about, if you start saving for retirement at different ages, you've got to, the earlier you get started, the longer you have to have those monies make you money for the longer term. So, that's a great point where.
Yeah. And I think that comes with, if you just kind of boil this down, it's prioritizing yourself, right? So part of this is there's a lot of topics on the slide here, right? So, we're talking about retirement saving, reviewing life insurance, building out our short-term and long-term goals. But, to Monica's point, everybody's at a different stage in life and their priorities are different, right? And what you're thinking about from a financial standpoint, we have to make decisions in terms of what's the highest priority. But I think if we start with ourselves, right, that comes with, hey, if I want to travel the world, Monica, you want to travel the world.
I do.
Right. And so if you're working until you're 80, you can't be traveling the world. So you have to, develop a pathway for you to be able to do that, right, with your family. And I do believe that starts with us prioritizing ourselves, right? And really kind of sitting down and figuring, okay, how much will I be putting into different buckets for my benefit moving forward, right? It's not, that may sound easy, but it is kind of difficult because there's a lot of different buckets to choose from, right?
Sure.
And so, having some sort of a checklist where you can kind of take a look at some of these items and figure out, okay, my next paycheck is going to be used to fund X, Y, and Z, right? I think, again, sooner you start with that, I think the better position you put yourself in.
And again, baby steps, it's just thinking about this will get the wheels in motion as to what, can I put here this amount and here this other amount, and we'll talk a little bit about budgeting, right? And this will incorporate, that's why the first thing we want to talk about is reviewing your goals, establishing new goals if you haven't done so. But, we'll talk about, also about how budgeting is a very important component about this, because then you can direct traffic to different buckets, right? And different pieces.
Absolutely. And I actually have a quote. It's a Yogi Berra quote that I love. And just in regards to goals. And the quote goes, if you do not know where you are going, you'll end up someplace else. Right. So knowing where you want to go. And obviously there's no one size fits all. So trying to define what those goals are so you can take the steps that are needed to end up in the place that you do want to be is paramount.
I love the phrase, Kate.
Right?
Yeah,
it's
great.
A good one.
That's a good one.
So I'm pretty sure budget is a 4-letter word to most people, right? I think when we start talking budgets with clients, I can see, people start getting uncomfortable. I like to view budgets not as a can't spend. I like to view budgets almost as a permission to spend in an organized fashion, right? In a pre-planned fashion, so that we're making sure that we are filling up some of those savings goals that we need to accomplish. But I don't know, how has your experience been with budgeting? I think it is a really sensitive topic for a lot of folks.
Yeah. And I will tell you, even personally, right? Creating a budget is not a simple thing.
No,
and this is, we're planners and this is what we do. But, when you're talking, in reality, like putting down together what you're spending, then there's things that are very simple, right? Like, how much you're paying for your mortgage and your kid's school or whatever. But there's other things that can really get tricky. So again, it's baby steps. It's not saying, okay, I'm going to solve it all, but it's really, getting a piece of paper and saying, okay, where's my money going? What is coming in and what's going out the door, right? And it's spreadsheets. There's different tools that you can do. I think, as a suggestion, something that works really well for me when I'm looking through what did I spend? If you have a credit card, and again, responsible debt management, but if you have a credit card where you put a lot or most of your charges, they create at the end of the year this annual summary, which they will give you your whole year of spending, and they'll put it in different categories. And it is just a tool, an illustration of what happened to your money in that credit card throughout the year. So it just helps you kind of think of things like, oh, I spent this much in dining out, or I spent this much in travel, or whatever. And again, to Kate, to what you said, it's not saying, well, I shouldn't spend it. It's just about saying, this is what I'm spending, and how is that spending working in relation to what we're bringing in?
Absolutely. It's building that awareness. And exactly. So that's such good timely advice, because we're all getting those statements. Maybe some of us are scared to open them after the holidays, right? But yes, it puts together that beautiful annual spending and breaks it down to all those categories. I also really took to the first thing you said, because, when I think about budget, I think of kind of considering a budget in two different ways. One is just, as you said, doing that kind of what I like to call that micro analysis, right? Where I'm putting together a detailed list of all my various spending items so I can kind of really get very granular. But oftentimes an easier place to start is sometimes just looking at, especially if you're working, if you're working, you usually know what you're making and you usually know what you're saving. So I always that's more of my macro type of, this is what I'm spending in a year. So, if let's say you're making $100,000 and you're saving $20,000, well, then $80,000 must be going somewhere, right? So kind of using that as a good proxy to get started, and then really looking at, getting more granular with where are the funds going, and then not just where are the funds going, but actually to the point on this slide is it discretionary or non-discretionary, right? So if you do need to make cuts, looking to more of that discretionary side, maybe I don't need that Starbucks every day as much as that, or where do I need to cut? Because ideally, some of that discretionary is ultimately going to savings, right?
Absolutely.
True. Yeah, maybe my kid doesn't need a personal trainer for lacrosse, right? I think the information that you can glean from looking at some of these annual reports that the two of you were talking about is knowledge is power, right? It's there. The information's there. I think if you just tell yourself, hey, I'm going to spend a little time just getting to know myself from a spending perspective a little bit better, it does, shed some light on, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I'm doing, right? This is what I did last year. Do I want to continue doing that moving forward? And then, I think that I would agree with you in terms of the budget, right? How people kind of think about it. And I think people immediately jump to on a budget, right? I'm on a budget, which is a very different thing, right? Of course, there's people that are, let's say, on a fixed level of income, and so therefore they need to be very careful about how they're spending and things like that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're really talking about how are we choosing to spend our resources, right?
Right. It doesn't have to always be austerity, right? It can be exactly how to allocate these funds, right? This resource that we have.
And the tools are better. It's not just your annual report, right? There's lots of different software and apps out there that today it's easier than it's ever been to be able to figure out where are these pieces going, right? And I think it's just about, looking at what are those options, figuring out, does this app work for me? But I think the tools are there. And again, I think the more information that we can highlight, the better decisions we can make moving forward.
Yep, absolutely.
And one point that is here on the slide and we haven't touched on, we've touched a lot on the spending and where's our spending going, but, it is also, Tom made the comment previously about pay yourself first. And that is very important. And that is where, kind of out of sight, out of mind, if you do kind of like automatic, contributions to your 401k, or if you have a brokerage account, like those things where kind of like it came in, but it went out to a saving vehicle immediately. You're paying yourself. You're thinking about the future, right? Whether it's an emergency, whether it's retirement, whether it's whatever, but all of these things, out of sight, out of mind, money came in, but it already went to fund my 401k or to fund my travel budget or my travel savings goal or some, whatever it is. But if you establish those automatic recurring money movements to the different investment vehicles, it is probably much better than you saying, oh, I have this money and what am I going to
$50
do
in
with
my
it?
wallet. I'm going to spend it. Right.
Right.
Let's go.
Where are we going next?
Absolutely. That's a great point, Monica. Right. For sure.
So it's just, it doesn't have to be such a daunting task. I know we're in the next slide, but it is just like Tom said, information is power. It's just understanding what's happening.
This is a really important slide, I think, because especially, 2023 was a fantastic year for the markets, right? And reviewing that asset allocation and making sure that asset allocation is in line with not only your long-term goals, but also your short-term goals, right? And, a lot of times clients ask us how we sleep at night, with market volatility and whatnot. Well, that's because we're watching the time horizon for when funds are needed. So anything, any short-term needs really need to be in more liquid investments. Obviously, more long-term goals. That's where we, strive for diversification and, some of those assets that might be more volatile, but could offer more return over time as well. And 2023, because it was such a big market movement, might have kind of skewed some of your portfolio allocation. So I think this is a really timely slide, Monica.
And I also think, importantly, that, whether, you work with us, we work on a financial plan, and that financial plan is an extremely helpful tool because it will help you with those things, Kate, that you're mentioning, like, your cash flow, your liquidity needs in the short term, but also looking at that asset allocation and making sure that you have enough risk according to your goals,
right,
according to your risk tolerance, but, to fund your long-term goals and enough liquidity to fund, more short-term in nature goals.
Sure.
And obviously, like you say, this is a good time to perhaps review all that because you might need to rebalance, right? Your equities, because there was a strong year in the markets, might have grown a little bit outside of the range or outside of your target. So that's when you bring them back. And then whatever other asset class you need to bring up, you would have to do that. But that's always something that, you can't say, oh, well, I look at it in 10 years. I mean, you need to review it. You need to review it and you need to kind of make sure also as your goals have changed, that asset allocation is changing, right? To be all consistent. But
yeah,
the plan, if you have an advisor and you don't have a plan, ask them. If you're working with us, you have, we're creating plans, but a plan is an excellent tool to really look at all these things combined.
Absolutely. And that was, that raises a good point, Monica, because I think too, the one thing that I think I want folks to think about too is, has their situation changed in 2023, and how do we tweak things, going forward for any of those changes? So, maybe it's a birth, maybe it's a death, maybe it's a marriage, maybe they moved to another state. And, that could have implications not only for, the planning goals, but also for the investment structure, right? So making sure to keep, that in mind when looking at the portfolio as well, all those different changes and certainly, making sure to incorporate that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think when people's families start to expand, right, the whole thought process around college funding, right, becomes an important aspect of the overall picture in terms of somebody's goals. And, you gotta, if you want to fund something like, let's say, a 529 college savings plan, right, that capital needs to come from somewhere, right? So to your point about, hey, I'm allocated this particular way in my non-retirement account, I got to fund my 529 using cash. So I got to come up with a plan, right, to figure out where am I going to get that capital from? How much do I want to fund this 529 plan? There's lots of different, we can have a whole nother episode about college funding, but lots of different ways that you can take advantage of the flexibility that 529s have. But yeah, it does. And then, once that account is funded, then that will have its own investment, strategy and allocation and things like that. So I think, just making sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball in terms of, I like your point about time horizon, right? There is an investment time horizon, right? And it's different for different parts of our portfolio. Certainly the time horizon for our 401ks might be much different than, if we have some after-tax assets in a brokerage account, right? that's more readily accessible as opposed to my 401k, which is really geared for much long-term retirement.
So almost like that asset location kind of concept, right? Making sure that the portfolios are allocated appropriately for each of their needs. And also then watching, the tax implications for those investments, within those various accounts, of course. That's always a biggie, right? Making sure you're being as tax smart as you can within those different accounts.
Yeah, I think the thought process for most folks is, if I fund my retirement accounts, I get an immediate tax deduction, right? A lot of pre-tax contributions. But, recently during both iterations of the Secure Act, right? Congress they're looking for ways to generate revenue, right? And so they've created more ways to fund retirement accounts via a Roth designation, which means you're funding with after-tax dollars, right? So it's a way for the government, right, to increase revenue and right now. But that leads to more questions in terms of, do I want to max out my 401k, for example, and how do I do it? Should I do it pre-tax versus Roth dollars? Do I want to build up assets in both buckets, for tax diversification reasons, down the line? And some of these things they're mandating, right? And some of those things will come online, I think, next year or so, based on how they wrote the legislation, because they're establishing rules depending on how much you're earning and things like that. But I think this just kind of highlights, now that it's January, it's a great time to check out, here's my allocation in this particular account. What changes do I think I want to make? Am I too loaded up in one particular sector that maybe did really well last year? And there might be some other areas that are poised for better growth in 2024.
And I think we're going to have another episode on the different ways, right? The traditional 401k, Roth 401k, Roth IRA. So stay tuned, guys, on that.
Yeah. And speaking of too, watch those contribution amounts for this year as well, because a lot of those 2024 amounts have changed, right? So if you do have the ability to, be saving into those tax deferred investment in vehicles, or, a Roth IRA, some of those contribution limits have changed. So making sure that you're adjusting your targets appropriately, if possible.
Yeah. And I think, it goes like the next slide. It talks a little bit about, it goes together, right, with the asset allocation, because to review our asset allocation, right, we need to know what we have, right? So this is just creating a personal financial inventory of assets. I think that's a little bit less daunting as a budget, but it is really saying, what do we have, right? We have our real assets. We have our home. What do we have? Do we have savings? Do we have a brokerage account? What's our 401k? Do we have any Roths? So you put them all together and then you group them by type of account, right? You have taxable accounts, you have tax deferred accounts, you have tax free accounts. So you just do a little list of what you have from an investment portfolio perspective and also from other types of assets, right? Investments in a firm or business partnerships, so on. But just creating that, this is my balance sheet or my personal financial inventory of what I have. Balance sheet will also include your liabilities, but it is just knowing what you have and what type of account it is.
I think that's great advice because it also allows you to track your progress, right? And almost compare that number versus, hey, where was I at the beginning of the year, right? And how am I progressing to meeting some of those longer term goals? So I think that this is a great slide and also really helps, so you can monitor that progression, make sure that you are moving in the direction that you need to be going.
Absolutely. I think the tracking of it, becomes something that I think some people lose sight of, right? But that really is a way that we figure out how are we measuring success, right?
Sure.
And there's lots of different ways to track that, and success means something different to everybody. But based on, Monica, I was going to say, based on your experience working with clients over the years, what's been, how would you describe ways that you've helped clients track that success over time? Like what's worked well for clients and you to be able to answer that question?
Well, that's a great question, Tom. One of them is reviewing the financial plan, right? Because the financial plan, as you review it, it will have updated asset values for the different investment portfolios or for the different investment accounts. It will also have, for example, if lowering debt was a goal, you can also see where those balances are. So if your situation changes, that would merit reviewing the portfolio, not necessarily once a year. It would merit reviewing it when that situation changed. Like Kate said, marriage, death, babies, and so on. But if not, I think looking at the plan and progress yearly also helps keep clients real, right? And saying, okay, well, I wanted to pay my $20,000 student loan and I am at $5,000. So I'm only $5,000 away. So it's a good way for us to have the conversation with them and see where exactly they are. And I think it keeps them, it's almost puts a little pressure, right? Because
sure.
it helps them say, okay, I'm checking, let's see where we are. But I would say communication, Tom, is very important. Constant communication, saying, okay, just, we've had a good year or we've had a bad year in the markets. Let's look at that. And one thing that I also think it's important, because when there's a bad, we don't like to have bad years in the market. No one does, right? But they happen. But I think in those times, it's very important for us to have the conversation with clients and say, look, there is a testing, right? There's a Monte Carlo simulation that takes place. And that doesn't assume markets are always good, because that's not reality. But even in those instances, your plan, we've tested for these types of bad situations. So it is good to also kind of help them stay grounded in terms of these are your goals and there's going to be times like this, but you are on track. Let's look at it even after a bad year. So I know I didn't say like a concrete answer in terms of what I do, but I think it's communication, reviewing the plan, and really listening to where your client is coming from.
I think that's great. Great points, Monica. Exactly. And just to highlight too, that communication, it's two-way, right? So you're communicating with the client and hopefully, encouraging the client as well to be very, listening to any changes in their life and their situation, and then updating the plan accordingly. Because as I always like to joke, life happens. Stuff happens that come out of left field and the situation changes pretty rapidly. So we want to be on the forefront, really helping our clients navigate those changes, making sure that the plan is still in positive shape, or if there are any tweaks that need to be made. So keeping that two-way dialogue open is just so important.
Yeah. And I think it kind of highlights a little bit of accountability, right? On both sides, right, Kate? I think if you're doing the work with clients and you're reviewing the numbers and they can see those numbers, right? It's like that doesn't disappear, right? You can review a snapshot of, okay, here's how we started things in 2023, right? Now the year is over. Where are we now, right? And that includes a whole bunch of different things in terms of what priorities they set, right? Did they achieve those some of those short-term goals or so? And that does allow us to, continue that or maintain that level of accountability moving forward. And from my experience, I'd say there's some clients that really, really love that they buy into, the process and things like that, right? And they can see it in front of them from a visual standpoint. And then there's some clients that are just a little bit more, relaxed about things, and as long as we're not losing sight of the big picture, they're not losing sight of the big picture, and that we're crunching some numbers or so, they feel good about where they're headed. But I do think that the more time you can spend on more concrete goals, right? I think that's where clients see that success, right? They see that progress over time, which is really satisfying from our standpoint.
Yeah, and being able to quantify, some of this material, I think is very helpful. Being able to see, balance sheets and along the way, I think is really helpful for folks.
And progress.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Towards those goals. So this is something that in this day and age that we are living, it is now part of what we consider, also a key element of your financial wellness, is making sure that your data and your information, your personal information, is secure and it's protected. because hackers out there are, oh my God, so sophisticated. We recently had a guest speaker from JP Morgan on cybersecurity. And when you hear her presentation, you're so scared at the end of it, because she just shares some statistics as to how quickly they can break your password, and how they, your information is more valuable if there's a phone number attached, or,
Right.
all these things. And it is the reality. It's where we live now. So it is very important to make sure you have strong passwords, that you change them frequently. And I have to say, sometimes probably I don't change them as frequently as I should.
I know.
But you have really strong passwords, don't you,
hard.
Monica?
I have super strong passwords.
Yeah.
And but still, these passwords, this woman in this presentation that I'm referring to, she said how long it takes them to break even a strong password. And they have, I don't know what these guys are very, very sophisticated, but that's why it's important to just keep doing that. Make sure, no one likes dual factor authentication, but you know what? We need to have it, because that is just another layer of security.
Sure.
You're probably banking on your phone, right? You have your app for your bank, and you have your app for your
It's convenient.
brokerage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very convenient. But because it's all out there, we really need to protect it as much as we can. So, strong passwords, and change them frequently. And if you don't want to be dealt with that burden, because it is a burden, there's some apps out there that can hold all your different passwords. Yeah. I mean, I think one is LastPass maybe, or I don't know the name. I mean, there's a couple of them. But those just kind of keep them all in one. You have one password to remember, and extremely secure, but do whatever works for you, but just having your security of your financial assets in mind.
It's key. Yeah. And I'm going to hop in real quick too. Sorry, apologies. But just kind of best practice too with updating passwords. A lot of times too, you want to make sure that your virus software is up to date, right? So before you change those passwords, run your virus security, so make sure that your computer is clean, and then probably change your passwords might even be, taking it that next step.
Yeah, I think you don't need to. We don't want people to think that you have to be a tech genius, right, to be able to survive in the digital world. Because I don't think that is the case. But I do think that it's just about being diligent, right, and smart and practical about, okay, hey, listen, there's bad actors out there, and because we're connected, we just need to do some smart things just to make sure that our information is as secure as it can be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that, just the last thing there is, you can get your credit reports once a year. It doesn't cost anything, because you don't want anyone to use your social security or impersonate you and get, a loan for a car or something. So it is important to stay on top of that and review it once a year. And sometimes it might be even things like, I found one of my credit reports had my wrong birthday. So you can also just check for these types of things, but it's good to have, it's good to stay on top of that. And one thing that is not here on the slide, I did it, and I think it works for me. It just gives me a little bit more sense of security. Is as long as you're not buying anything in the near future, like a mortgage or a car loan or something, you can freeze your. You can go on all 3 credit bureaus and freeze your credit, which means that if anyone is trying to apply in your name for anything, they won't go through, because if you need to apply for something, you need to unfreeze it and then go back into. But it just gives. It is a step, and it is a little bit of work, but it's another layer of security.
It's a sleep at night. Yeah, that's a sleep at night. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And what is on the screen is running your annual credit report, which I think is important. But a little side note on that is, so Monica, to your point, there are 3 credit reporting bureaus, right? And so you can run an annual credit report for all 3, which is essentially you can do 3 annual reports every single year. You can run them every 4 months if you want to. And there's no fee for that. So there's a lot out there that charge you a fee, but there is, you can do this without any cost. And you can take advantage of all three of them just to make sure. So when you look at that report, right, what you're doing is you're looking for credit accounts that are truly yours, right? Whether it's a car loan, a credit card, a mortgage, things like that. If you see things on there that look strange, that could be an instance where somebody has used your credit to open up some account. And to Monica's point, there are ways for you to, basically choose to kind of lock some of that stuff down so that you're in control of what's happening.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just reviewing those open lines of credit. I remember when I first got the report, I was like, oh my gosh, things that you had opened, in college to get that 15% discount or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, let's close that. So yeah, it's important reviewing those open lines of credit for sure.
Okay. And this is actually, it's our last slide, but it's extremely important, is one, if you do not have an estate plan in place, it is important that you create one because we don't know, right? Life is unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen, but it is very important to have a basic estate plan in place to protect your loved ones. If something were to happen, to you, you want to make sure that the assets, your loved ones, if you have minors, all of those things are based on what you want to happen, not what would happen if there's no documents in place.
I think a lot of times too, people think like, oh, well, you know what? I don't have tens of $1 million. I don't need an estate plan, but you do, right?
Absolutely.
I don't think that there isn't a net worth. You need to have certain documents in place, or probably a good idea, because to your point, otherwise someone else will decide for you.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great point, Kate. I think no matter what your net worth is, this is really about control, right? I want to be in control of what happens to my assets and resources, right? If I'm gone. I don't want other people deciding. I don't want to complicate my surviving loved ones with unnecessary, discussions with, let's say, somebody in the court system, right? Because I didn't have a document in place, So it's really about, one, deciding what you want to be in control of, and then two, just making sure that your surviving family doesn't have to deal with unnecessary steps, right? And complications and cost. All that stuff. So, Monica, you mentioned before, taking an inventory of your different assets, right? Different accounts that you've created over the course of your career. And I think that's something that people don't do a lot of, right? It's people say, oh yeah, I have a 401k and then I got, money in this account. It's a joint account at Schwab, and I got this other account. And next thing you know, you look up and you have, it's not uncommon to have 10, 12 different accounts, right? Because you're like, oh, I started that account when I was with this particular job. And then we moved and we opened up a bank account at this place and whatnot. Next thing you know, you got stuff everywhere, right? So if something does happen to me, it's sometimes it's really hard for, if you're married, your surviving spouse, to figure out where is all the money, right? What kind of accounts are they? Are there retirement accounts? Is there a beneficiary designation? Is there a will that says this account is now mine, right? Was it a joint account where now I automatically become the owner, right? Or was it an individual account? And now I gotta, look at the terms of the will and things like that. So it doesn't need to be too complicated, but I think if you do have a good understanding of what that inventory looks like, you can at least have that information in front of you, so you kind of know what to do if something happens. Sure,
and notifying the people who need to know, right? To your point, Tom, right? And everyone kind of jokes, well, I don't need a will. I guess in a way you kind of do already have a will, because the state will decide for you, right? So you do have a will, even if you don't have a will, but is it really how you want things to go? And who do you want making those important either medical decisions, or if you become incapacitated, who's going to be the one in charge of some of those really key decisions in your life? So it is really important to make these designations and to make these authorizations and whatnot.
Yeah. I'd say it's not a heavy lift. It's not as heavy as people think it is. I think that one of the important things to think about before you get some of these documents in place is just to think about who are those key people, right? Kate, to your point, right? Who do I want to act as executor of my will? Who do I want to have make health care decisions for me if I can't make my own, right? There's got to be, you got to think about people in your life that you trust that would make good decisions and act in good faith, right? And I think if you think that through before you sit down, let's say with an attorney, you put yourself in I think, a good position to get the documents created in a way that makes sense for you and your family.
Absolutely. And then once they're in place, Monica, what's kind of the best practice, for reviewing the documents and, timeline there?
I mean, what we say is it's good to review it every 5 years. But however, if you had something in your personal life changed, or you got, you got more assets or something changed in your life, you should review it at that point in time, right? Because we have situations in the past where, they did have a good estate plan in place, but something happened. And then it was like, it was applied to whatever was the legislation. Then, legislation changes too. And you need to make sure that your estate plan is appropriate for, whatever current legislation it is. I know there's like right now, big changes potentially at the end of 2025 in terms of the estate tax exemption. That's another episode too. But, I think you review it at least every 5 years, or if your situation changes.
And it could be just, I moved to a different state, right? The laws in a different state could be very different from the laws of the state I just moved from. And that, just as simple as something like that would be an opportunity to update, what I have in place.
Right. Absolutely. And, marriage, birth, death, updating those beneficiaries, that's often, can be easily overlooked. But reviewing those beneficiaries, and ideally reviewing those beneficiaries with your estate attorney as well, making sure that everything is as should be, accounts are titled as they should be. A lot of times folks will open a trust account, but then forget to actually put the assets into the trust if needed, by the advice of their attorney. So things like that, just reviewing. And that's actually where that annual list too, of kind of putting all of the accounts together, how are they titled, is very important. What are the beneficiaries? Making sure all of those housekeeping type of items are up to date and in good order.
So we gave you a lot of work to do, but we hope this was helpful. And just, I think as you get in the habit of doing this, things are just, get easier. But all of these things, I think are very important for all of us to make sure we are reviewing on a regular basis. But thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for joining us, Monica. What a pleasure having you. Thank you for sharing this and all your knowledge. We appreciate it. We're having you back.
Oh, I already had a few ideas for other.
Back. All right, good. I know.
I think we just said we have
3 or
14 more episodes in a 12-month period.
We're gonna have to.
We got to start doubling up here, Kate.
Well, that's what I was just thinking, Tom. My gosh. But this was so exciting.
I just wanted to say one more thing. We talked a lot about goals, right? And a lot of this can sound daunting, but I think one thing that stood out to me recently was, so there's a book called Grit. It's written by Angela Duckworth. She's a PhD in psychology. And I was actually recently, Monica and I were lucky enough to she was speaking at an event we were at recently, and she went through this experience of kind of testing this term called grit, right? And she, at the bottom line, she said that goals are about achieving things, right? And you can achieve those goals through talent, right? And that that could lead to some success. But she said that there's also this underlying element of perseverance, right? No matter what life throws in your way. And she was asked a question about goals and why do we even set goals, right? Why do people think about goals and things like that, right? Sometimes they just seem too unattainable. And she said that in her experience, setting goals is really about the pursuit of happiness, right? Which really kind of stood out to me. And I if you think about it, we're all trying to get someplace, right, where we seem fulfilled, right? And setting goals, that does make sense, right? This is something that's important to me. And if I do achieve it, I think there is some level of happiness that's achieved there. So I just love the way that she phrased that. And I have started the book. It's called Grit again, and can't wait to finish it. But I think we're all trying to pursue some level of happiness here, and I think goals are a great way for us to try to achieve that.
Well, absolutely. And the beginning of the year is a great place to start, assessing, reviewing, and moving towards those goals.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess thank you to all of our listeners, to all of our viewers. Hit like, subscribe, share. And here's hoping things go according to plan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.